Nuclear energy, a term that for some will be the way forwards towards decarbonisation, and for many, justifiably, creates unease. Whether it's the nuclear waste that remains a hazard for tens of thousands of years, the fact that the fuel can be used to make weapons of mass destruction, or that it has led to some infamous disasters, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, and of course, Chernobyl. But is this true for all nuclear power sources? Or are there some that may persuade the public to return to a nuclear future? That's what I would like to talk about today. The kid at the back of the class, thorium. First off, let's talk about our current nuclear power supply, both in UK and globally. Over the past year in the UK, 14.8% of the 26.4 gigawatts of generation was nuclear, just over half of the generation by fossil fuels, which was mostly gas, at 27.7%. Globally, fossil fuels and traditional biomass, that being chopped wood, accounted for just over 80% of the energy consumption last year, while nuclear only accounted for 3.72%. Comparatively, the UK is doing well, in both green energy and nuclear power. However, there is still a ways to go to get to total decarbonisation. And although offshore wind works great for us here in the UK, where we get tons of wind, the same can't be said for all countries. Let's cover the basics of how nuclear power generation works. This video is not intended to go deep into the physics and engineering, and instead be a brief overview. Simply put, in the most common type of nuclear reactor, a pressurized water reactor, fuel rods, most commonly made of uranium-235, emit energy through radioactive decay that then goes into the surrounding water heating it. When it boils, the steam released is used to turn a turbine, where the electrical energy is generated. Now let's look at the problems surrounding this, and why there is so much hesitancy to further invest in this field. First off, uranium. Although it's 100 times more common than silver, the useful isotope, 235, only accounts for 0.7% of this. It therefore needs to go through a rigorous enriching process, which at every step along the way generates more nuclear waste, which we'll talk about later, and costs money. The power plant itself needs a source of water as well, one that is at risk of getting polluted by the reactor and limits its geographical placement. The reactors also have a reputation for being volatile, due to the aforementioned catastrophes. Although safety regulations and procedures are so stringent that these disasters are a nightmare of the past. In fact, even accounting for them, nuclear energy is still the second safest form of power generation, accounting for only 0.03 deaths per terawatt hour of electricity. That's the average power consumption for 150,000 people a year in Europe. That is 93 times less than natural gas deaths, our target for removal in the UK. Finally, there is a problem of the nuclear waste. Uranium-235 can decay mainly into cesium-137 and strontium-90. These have half-lives, that being the lifetime for the radioactivity to half, of about 30 years, but they are very radioactive during this period. Uranium can also absorb neutrons and form plutonium-239. These heavier products are less radioactive, but they have half-lives of 24,000 years. All of these waste products require remote storage and can create problems in transport. Along with the previously mentioned refining process, this is less than ideal. Waste can be reprocessed to gather the unused uranium and useful plutonium, but this is costly and rarely done, especially in countries like America, where currently there is no waste reprocessing facilities. Now, let me introduce you to thorium-232. Unlike uranium, it is fertile, not fissile. This means it isn't really radioactive by itself, but can still become it by being bombarded by neutrons from a normal radioactive source like plutonium. This has multiple benefits, which we will cover. It is also 4 times more abundant than uranium, not specifically uranium-235, just all uranium. It is also found naturally almost entirely in its useful form, thorium-232. This, and the fact that it isn't largely radioactive, makes it much safer and easier to mine, and doesn't need any refining. This could make it a much cheaper source if a larger supply was present. It is also theorized that thorium generates 1,000 times less fission waste products than uranium, and the products it does produce have shorter half-lives. Thorium can also generate more fissile fuel than it consumes, in the form of uranium-233, which it can use to generate those neutrons we need. This, and its abundance, could make it a more long-term solution than uranium. There is also no way to use thorium for nuclear weapons. making it easier to justify trading for between countries that maybe aren't on the same political side. China is scheduled to complete a thorium reactor in 2030, which will generate 60 megawatts. This reactor is a molten salt reactor, which suits thorium particularly well. These reactors can provide high neutron efficiency, which we need for that uranium-233 generation we were talking about. It also doesn't need water, and instead uses a salt mixed with the fuel, while also being the coolant to spin the turbine. This means it doesn't need a source of water, and can therefore be placed far from the ocean or lakes. It is also theorized that thorium could generate 200 times more energy than uranium per gram of fuel. That's also 3.5 tons of coal per gram of thorium. There are problems, however. Research still needs to be made, and as such developmental costs will be high, something a lot of countries can't afford right now. The fuel rods are also more expensive to produce and recycle currently, due to the lack of research. Being nuclear reactors means they have a high initial cost to build as well. But for long-term baseline power generation that every country needs, I think thorium-based reactors could still be the future. This was my very brief overview of the subject that is still undergoing research. Who knows what position we'll be in by 2030. Maybe fusion will finally be coming around. But anyways, thanks for listening, and goodbye.